This man is no ordinary doctor. He can perform extremely difficult surgeries that no other doctor can do. Today, there was a patient with an extremely critical abdominal artery rupture. If he didn't have surgery, he would die in just a few minutes. Unexpectedly, when brought this patient to the hospital, they refused to admit him because all the surgeons are busy. Even though the patient's family members were crying and miserable, the doctor still coldly chased them away. Young Min is an intern doctor. When he saw this scene, he couldn't bear it. He courageously received this surgery, but the dean still chased them away and said, Young Min was an intern, so how could he know how to do surgery? Young Min directly clung to the hospital bed to block. It is true that when the gods are too busy, the devil takes the throne. Suddenly something entered Young Min's body, making his eyes glow. An extremely difficult surgery that a trainee doctor like Young Min performed successfully. Since then, Young Min's career has risen like a kite in the wind. Young Min is called a professor because only he can afford to perform super difficult surgeries. But because of his outstanding surgical ability, Young Min also arrogantly sets the rules. He only saves people who have at least a 1% chance of survival. In cases of cardiac arrest, he refused treatment. Today, another patient died, and Young Min did not accept it. It seemed he knew in advance which patients would die. Young Min performed many of the hospital's most difficult surgeries. Therefore, he is even more arrogant and consider himself the best. But the turning point happened when one person appeared. Sung Tak is a newly arrived intern and also the nephew of the hospital president. Sung Tak's personality is the opposite of Young Min. When he goes to work, there are bodyguards accompanying him to carry things. This made Young Min have a grudge against him from the first day. After asking a few questions, Young Min learned that Sung Tak's grandfather was the president of the hospital. Sung Tak will definitely be the heir to this hospital. Hearing that Young Min despised this guy even more, Young Min went to tell the dean that he refused to accept this intern, but unexpectedly the director personally asked him to teach Sung Tak. Young Min immediately went to find Sung Tak to teach him a lesson. He asked Sung Tak the most difficult questions in medicine. Unexpectedly, Sung Tak answered every question correctly. Seeing that it doesn't make it difficult for Sung Tak in theory, Young Min starts forcing Sung Tak to watch him practice surgery. Today a patient had heart surgery for the 5th time, but because the risks were too high, even the head of the department did not dare to perform the surgery. In the entire country, there is only Young Min who can afford surgery. Young Min directly asked Sung Tak to assist him. Young Min has a habit of warming up his hands before performing difficult surgery. Any surgery Young Min performs will be successful. Sure enough, after 2 hours, the surgery was successful. However, when Young Min asked Sung Tak to remove the drainage tube, he stiffened and his limbs trembled. Young Min suddenly discovered that Sung Tak was very afraid of practicing, so he deliberately humiliated Sung Tak in front of the other trainees. When a patient is in critical condition, they will choose a gruff doctor like Young Min, or they will choose someone who only talks but doesn't know how to act like Sung Tak. Sung Tak was humiliated, but it was the truth, so he didn't dare say anything. Sung Tak was then transferred to the emergency room to be on duty. Here Sung Tak feels like a useless person when he can't do anything. Even taking the patient's blood is difficult. When welcoming patients, he was punched by them. Over here, the son of the tycoon chairman asked Young Min to perform heart surgery for his father. No matter how much it cost, he would pay. But Young Min said the chairman had too many underlying diseases. If they tried surgery, he would die. Unexpectedly, the son insisted that Young Min do it. This son's real purpose is to want his father to have surgery and then die to take over the family fortune. Young Min was taken by Jin Soo to visit his chairman's father. Young Min suddenly realized that this was his ex-lover's father, and his ex-lover Sejin also appeared here. She was also a doctor studying abroad in the US. Young Min still hates meeting his ex-lover because in the past she broke up with him because he was too poor. Because she is a doctor, Sejin clearly understands that her father cannot have heart surgery. Young Min also knows that, but he wants to show her how good he is now. If a doctor like her, who studied abroad, doesn't dare accept the surgery, he will make her regret leaving him. Young Min immediately went back to his room to get blouse. Very soon, the president's heart surgery began. Because he had many underlying health conditions, Young Min had to try best to race against death. He knew this surgery could fail, but because he wanted to prove it to his ex-lover, he did it regardless. To avoid falling asleep during the process, he had to constantly yell. After 10 hours, the surgery was successful, but while waiting for the president to wake up, a sinister plot was carried out. Young Min Min and a colleague was Dr. Taehyun kept watch at the chairman's bedside. But Young Min doesn't know that Taehyun is a people of the sun who wants to harm the president. Young Min suddenly received a text message from his ex-lover to meet up. He didn't suspect anything and asked Taehyun to keep an eye on the president. He then left to meet his ex. Taehyun stayed and immediately carried out the plot. Young Min arrived at the meeting point but did not see Sejin. While in a bewildered, his colleagues reported that the chairman was in critical condition, so Young Min quickly drove back to the hospital. At the same time, a deliveryman was hired to cause an accident for Young Min. While waiting for the red light, he turned to confirm his prey. When Young Min walked a short distance, the deliveryman frantically chased after him without Young Min even knowing. He suddenly blocked the car in front, causing Young Min to dodge and have a serious accident. Young Min woke up and tried to get out of the car. The person who hit him with a motorbike also lay unconscious here. Young Min checked his next pulse, but his arm went through his arm. When he wanted to give first aid, his arm also went through his chest. Young Min was shocked and did not understand what happened. He walked over and saw his body still slumped there. It turned out that his soul had left his body. The weaker the body, the more the soul disappears. Young Min had to sit in the ambulance with his body to the hospital. Here his colleagues rushed to give him first aid. Young Min just looked at and knew how to save him, but his colleagues didn't know what to do. The only person on main duty here is trainee Sung Tak. Fortunately, Sung Tak is good at theory, so he can read the disease. Sung Tak said Young Min needed urgent surgery or he would die, but the hospital today does not have any surgical doctors. Sung Tak holds a scalpel but does not dare to do it. While Young Min's blood pressure is dropping and Young Min's life is in danger, Young Min's soul tried to reach for the knife to perform surgery but could not. Now he is extremely helpless. Seeing that Young Min was about to die, Sung Tak risked taking a scalpel. Young Min screams, could it be that Sung Tak is taking revenge on him? Sung Tak was shaking and out of breath. When he put the knife down, Young Min suddenly held Sung Tae's hand to stop him. As a result, Young Min's soul entered Sung Tak's body. Sung Tak was immediately controlled by Young Min. Young Min made the same gesture as usual, then shouted and began performing the surgery very skillfully. So Young Min's soul is undergoing surgery to save his own body. He mastered suturing the tear in his heart, which was extremely difficult. The successful surgery stabilized his blood pressure. Young Min's soul also returned to his body. Sung Tak woke up not understanding what happened, but suddenly Young Min's blood pressure dropped sharply. His soul was thus out body again, but because he was too weak, his soul could not re-enter Sung Tak's body. Sung Tak therefore doesn't know what to do anymore. The surgeons had no one else because they were all busy with the chairman's emergency. Young Min's soul collapsed because he was about to lose his life. At the critical moment, Taehyun was able to return and quickly perform surgery on the torn left ventricle. The surgery was completed very quickly, but Taehyun deliberately did some procedure that caused Young Min's body to fall into a deep coma, not knowing when he would wake up. Young Min was extremely confused. He tried everything to get his soul back into his body, but couldn't. He didn't want himself to die like that. Outside, the female doctor interrogates Sang Tak. She asked him if he was possessed by Young Min's spirit. Why did you do the same surgery gesture as Young Min? But Sang Tak denied, saying that he was actually very good at surgery, but had been hiding it for a long time. On this side, Young Min was keeping watch over his body when he suddenly discovered that the drainage tube had been pulled out. It seemed like someone wanted him to be unconscious forever. Young Min's soul tried to enter another doctor's body to reattach it, but it failed. Unexpectedly, the cleaning lady here could hear and see him. She immediately helped him attach the tube, then greeted him, making Young Min extremely surprised. Young Min followed and found out that the cleaning lady was also possessed by a spirit. That spirit is Uncle Tef. Uncle Tef has been a ghost for a long time, so he knows everything. So he explains to Young Min the rules of ghosts. That is, the soul cannot be more than 100 meters away from its body. Furthermore, if you enter many other people, you will not be able to enter your body again in the future. Since then, Young Min has been looking out for himself because his personality is very harsh and unpleasant to everyone, so no one comes to visit him. Every day only intern Sung Tak comes to visit him. Sung Tak could see Young Min's ghost, but he pretended not to see it so Young Min wouldn't bother him. Young Min kept following Sung Tak but was suddenly blocked by an invisible wall. This is the line that he cannot cross. Uncle Teth explained that the soul can only travel a maximum distance of 100 meters from the body. If it wants to go anywhere, it must ask someone to take the comatose body with it. Young Min stood looking at his body helplessly. Young Min was about to give up when Sejin's father's soul came here. The chairman said Young Min had to come back to life to save him. Young Min ran to the room where the chairman was lying to find out the reason, but when he got to the door, he met Sejin there. Sejin wanted to visit her father, but her brother's bodyguard wouldn't let her in. The older brother didn't want Sejin to come in and save the father from waking up. Anyway, he wants his father to die to take over the inheritance. Sejin couldn't couldn't visit his father, so she had to leave. She sat and sobbed because she couldn't do anything. Young Min saw her crying and suddenly felt guilty, so he entered his soul into Sungtak's body to see how the chairman was doing. At this time, an emergency case was brought in, and the patient was seriously injured in the abdomen, so Sungtak immediately put his hand into the patient's stomach, and with just one simple operation, he showed the treatment method. Then he went to Uncle Teth to ask how to escape the soul from the body. Here Uncle Teth showed young Min how to release his soul from Sungtak's body. Once again, Sungtak doesn't remember what just happened. The female colleague told Sungtak that thanks to his recent diagnoses, the patient's life was saved. She doesn't understand why Sungtak is suddenly so good. On this side, young Min went into the hospital room to visit the chairman, and the chairman's soul also sat right next to him. At this moment, the ungrateful son walked in. He cursed his father for being so stupid. If dad listened to daughter had not had surgery, he would still be alive. The two souls were shocked to discover that the son was the one who harmed the father. Jin-suk then went upstairs to meet the hospital director. It turns out that he and the director cooperated to inject drugs to harm the chairman, and at the same time, arranged for a delivery man to cause an accident for young Min so that he wouldn't be able to return in time to save the chairman. At the same time, Taehyun, the person who murdered the president, brought his colleagues to examine young Min. Because was in a deep coma, young Min was transferred to a special room. Here are all patients with no chance of recovery. Taehyun said these were the patients young Min abandoned in the past because they had no chance to live. Unexpectedly, young Min will also have to lie here one day. The words made young Min freeze. He suddenly realized that in the past it was really bad of him to abandon his patients. He was startled and turned around to see the souls of these patients here. These ghosts seemed to hate him. Young Min felt very regretful for refusing to treat them before, so every time he saw a seriously injured patient in need of urgent surgery, young Min couldn't help but borrow Sungtak's body, confidently instructing the superior doctors. After each successful surgery, Sungtak becomes a hero that many trainees admire. Since then, Sungtak felt like there was something unusual about him, so he reviewed the surveillance cameras and then used his power to ask security to delete all those videos. Because he was so tired of having his soul enter his body many times, Sungtak took a day off from work and stayed home to play games. Unexpectedly, something big happened at the hospital that day. Young Min's body was transferred to another place. He quickly ran back to the room to find doctors standing around. Young Min hurriedly went to find Sungtak to enter his soul into Sungtak's body but could not find. At this time, Taehyun met the director and asked to let young Min stay, but did not expect to be scolded by the director. The director told Taehyun not to forget that he was the one who harmed young Min to get a professorship, and he was the one who injected poison into the chairman that day to help the son harm his father to take over the fortune. On this side, young Min is still worriedly running everywhere looking for Sungtak. He was shocked to see the dean bringing the bed cart. At this moment, Sungtak came and secretly pushed his body away. After a while, the housewife came to help push him into the elevator and at the same time stop the dean when chased him there. Sungtak pushed it away for a while and was caught by the director. While not knowing how to explain, Sejin came. She did not allow anyone to touch young Min. Director Han came to find his mother and found out that Sejin was young Min's guardian. He angrily said that ever since his younger brother Sungtak came to work, the hospital was in chaos, but his mother still ordered Director Han to help his younger brother. Later, Sejin was at young Min's bedside. She regretted leaving him in the past. Young Min suddenly realized she still loved him. He followed her, but was eventually stopped by the 100m boundary. Young Min was extremely sad. At this moment, Sungtak passed by, so he borrowed Sungtak's body to run after his ex-lover. Because he couldn't see her, he took the car and drove away. That day, young Min drove around all day until night in the form of Sungtak. Unfortunately, while walking on the street, he accidentally bumped into a woman, causing his soul to be thrown out of body. Because if he goes more than 100m away from his body, his soul will vanish and die. So, young Min quickly begged Sungtak to save him, but Sungtak only paid attention to the fainted woman. It seemed like she had some very serious illness. Young Min's two hands are about to disappear. If he keeps this up, he will die in just a few seconds. Suddenly, Sungtak told young Min to enter his body to save this patient. Sungtak then reached out his hand towards young Min. Young Min quickly touched his hand to let his soul enter Sungtak's body. Thanks to that, young Min kept his soul. After merging, young Min controlled Sungtak's body to sterilize the cutlery, then inject blood from the nerve tumor right in the middle of the street, helping the patient overcome the critical condition in time. The woman was then taken to the emergency hospital. Taehyun was amazed that Sungtak was able to handle this situation. Moreover, in the middle of the road, there was a lack of medical equipment. More and more the colleagues admire Sungtak. Young Min's coma caused the hospital to lack good doctors, so serious patients were also delayed in their surgery schedules. Among the cases was a child with a history of underlying medical conditions, whose health was so so weak that no other doctors dared to perform surgery. At that time, Young Min himself refused to operate on the boy. He even spurned the boy's hand away. Now looking back at this boy, Young Min feels even more regretful. Since then, Young Min has been more active in entering his soul into Sumtak's body to help Sumtak handle many serious emergency cases, despite the fact that it is extremely dangerous to enter souls into other people's bodies many times. Uncle Teth saw it and also worried about Young Min's soul. Young Min saved many people that day, so the souls who hated him before now love him. Unexpectedly, when he returned to the hospital room, he couldn't find his body anywhere. It turned out that Sejin moved him to the VIP room. From now on, she will stay here to take care of Young Min and take care of her father. Unfortunately, the JER director also liked Sejin. He came up with the idea of wanting to possess Sejin as much as possible. Young Min found him rude but couldn't do anything. One day, Sejin read the newspaper and saw that her father had regained consciousness. In fact, Jin Suk intentionally spread rumors to sell stocks. Sejin immediately went to find his father, but his brother still prevented her from entering. Young Min went inside and discovered that the president was still in a coma. Jin Suk announced that he would sell the stock when it was at its peak, wait until his father died, and then the stock would decrease so he could take the money to buy it. Later, Young Min followed Taehyun to find out the truth and discovered that Taehyun was an accomplice of the director and the evil son. The director appointed Taehyun to take over and take care of Sejin's father with the task of removing the breathing tube when needed. In return, Taehyun will soon be promoted to professor. Knowing the truth, Young Min was extremely angry. He chased and beat Taehyun, but it had no effect. Young Min felt guilty, so he quickly went to apologize to Sejin's father. He promised to find a way to help the president fight against the unfilial son. That night, Young Min's soul entered Sumtak's body to find Taehyun and tell all his secrets. Sumtak threatens him to not do dirty things if he wants to live. Taehyun was extremely scared. He quickly ran out to chase Sangtak and asked how you knew that, but Sangtak was bewildered and didn't understand what was going on. Sangtak was afraid of being exposed, so he went to the control room and asked to delete the video, so when Taehyun came to watch he could no longer see anything. Back in the hospital room, Sejin says Young Min's brain condition is worsening day by day. Young Min remembered that Uncle Teth once said that possessing too much of a living person would cause the comatose soul to not be able to return to the body, at which point he would have to be a ghost forever, afraid of dying, so Young Min quickly escaped Sungtak's body. He saw his ex-girlfriend crying because she was afraid he would die. Sejin promises that if he wakes up, she will stay with him forever. Hearing this sentence, Young Min vowed not to enter another person's body again. At this time, a black soul appeared in the hospital. Other souls saw it and were frightened. He is the soul of the delivery man. Later at the hospital, they received an extremely critical patient. Young Min looked at him and immediately knew that this was a difficult case due to a heart attack. This difficult case caused Professor Taehyun to refuse treatment. Taehyun suggested letting Sumtak perform the surgery. Sumtak is worried because he doesn't know how to operate, but when he looked at the pitiful victim's wife and children, Sumtak agreed to perform this surgery. He ordered the patient to be quickly taken to the operating room, in fact to Young Min's soul to enter his body, but Young Min just swore to Sejin, so he can't do that anymore. Therefore Sumtak had to do the surgery himself. When the surgery began, both the doctor and the director came to observe. Sumtak was bewildered for a moment, not knowing what to do. He was clumsy even holding a scalpel. A moment later he suddenly turned towards Young Min. He begged Young Min to enter his body for the patient's sake. Young Min now knew that Sumtak had always seen him but had always pretended not to see him. Young Min was so surprised that he was overwhelmed. It turns out that Sumtak has had the ability to see ghosts since he was young. At that time he saw a mother who couldn't pick up a shoe. Sumtak was not afraid and picked up the shoe to help the ghost. Seeing that he sincerely begged, Young Min had to ignore everything and enter on Sumtak's body, but this scene made many onlookers suspicious. Immediately after that, Sumtak confidently performed the surgery, still turning his hand as always. Sumtak's movements holding the scalpel are indescribably skillful. The surgery was a complete success, surprising everyone. After finished the surgery, the two of them talking privately, Sumtak said he not only saw Young Min but all the other souls. Young Min feels deceived because Sumtak has been ignoring him for a long time, causing Young Min to enter Sumtak's body countless times without knowing. The two argued fiercely with statements of victory and defeat. After arguing, the two people stopped playing the body incarnation game. Since the miraculously successful surgery, everyone has wondered why Sangtak is a trainee but so good like that. The director also asked to review the video of the surgery that Sangtak just did. The next day, suddenly reporters rushed to find Sangtak. It turns out that director Han posted the news that Sangtak has excellent surgical ability online because he thought his younger brother was just lucky. In the future, Sangtak encountered a difficult case, and if he couldn't handle it, he would be severely criticized. Sangtak hated hates this brother very much. It turns out the two brothers are competing for inheritance. Ever since Young Min and Sung Tak got angry with each other, Sung Tak started having clumsy days alone. He was clumsy when performing operations with the patient, even removing the drain failed. Young Min saw but refused to help, so dissatisfied Sung Tak decided to take revenge. He opened the window and threw away Young Min's best vest. No matter how much Young Min begged, Sung Tak still dropped the vest on the street. The two people hate each other more and more each day. At this time, the black soul of the delivery man became increasingly stronger. This person is always following Young Min, and he doesn't know anything. As for Sejin, every day she tried bringing the food her father was allergic to the bodyguards, and they replied that he had eaten it all. After hearing this, Sejin immediately knew that her father had never woken up. Dad's soul was afraid that the more Sejin investigated, the more danger would be in. So his soul taught to Young Min's soul. The chairman wants to ask Young Min to take care of his youngest daughter. At that moment, Taehyun came in and gave the chairman an injection, which was poison to maintain the chairman's coma. The chairman knows that his son has a big plan, so he wants to ask Young Min to protect his daughter. On this side, the body of the delivery man who caused Young Min's accident is in critical condition. Fortunately, Sejin came to the emergency room in time. The delivery man's soul suddenly appeared and begged Young Min to save him. He told Young Min all the truth. That day, because of money, he caused an accident for Young Min. Unexpectedly, it put himself in a critical situation. He knelt down and asked Young Min for forgiveness. Young Min's questions were gradually revealed. Furthermore, Young Min eavesdropped on the conversation between Director Han and Sejin and learned that it was Director Han who borrowed Sejin's phone to text to meet him on the day of the accident. Therefore, Young Min must investigate and exonerate himself. Here, the seriously ill boy is begging Sung Tak for surgery. Sung Tak is extremely heartbroken, but he is unable to do that. Only Young Min can do this difficult case now. The boy then ran to hug his mother and cried, making Sung Tak even more heartbroken. So he found Young Min and wanted Young Min's soul to enter his body, and Young Min will operate on the child, and Sung Tak will help Young Min investigate the truth of his accident. The two quickly reconciled and agreed to cooperate. At this moment, there was an emergency patient, but the wife kept scolding him. It turned out that the victim went to the mountain to have an affair and fell down. Seeing that this case was troublesome, Young Min took the initiative to leave. But stupid Sung Tak deliberately wanted to enter Young Min's soul and come to save people. But as a result, the wife grabbed his hair. It hurt. At this time, the patient was unconscious and needed emergency treatment. Everyone immediately took the wife out so Young Min could work. The extremely talented Young Min successfully cured the patient. After surgery, the patient was taken to the recovery room. Unexpectedly, the lover's husband came here to take revenge. Young Min was very smart and quickly got out of Sung Tak's body as the doctor who saved that man, so Sung Tak was beaten. After this hurt incident, Sung Tak was angry with Young Min again. Unexpectedly, this scene was recorded by the camera and the director saw it. He asked the security guard to send him videos about Sung Tak every day. At this time, there was a girl outside crying bitterly, asking for her brother's hospital bill to be reduced. She is the delivery man's sister. To earn money for her brother's medical bills, she had to work until she was exhausted. The delivery man promised Young Min that if he could wake up, he would be a witness to Young Min's accident. This is an opportunity for Young Min to expose the director's plot. But before Young Min could do anything, the director started flirting with Sejin. It turns out that many years ago, he really liked Sejin. Watching her take a grain of rice from her hair and eat it, the director was fascinated. That afternoon, he brought food to flirt with Sejin, but saw her resting her head on Young Min. The lunchbox had to be thrown in the trash. Now that he has put Young Min into a coma, Sejin must be his. At the same time, Sung Tak tricked Taehyun into going somewhere else so he could replace Taehoin and inject the president with medicine. Sung Tak pretended to be confused, making the two bodyguards not pay attention, and Sejin successfully sneaked into the hospital room. When the security guard went out, Sejin sneaked in to see her father. Seeing her father motionless and haggard on the bed was extremely heartbreaking. Now she is sure that her evil brother harmed her father. Moments later, Sejin came out surprising the two bodyguards. She said that if they didn't want to lose their job, they should keep this a secret and next time don't stop her from entering. Sung Tak tells Sejin the truth about the delivery man causing Young Min's accident, so Sejin decided to be in charge of treating the delivery man. Today is the day the boy with a serious illness is operated on. Sung Tak took the boy into the operating room. At this time, Young Min also followed, but unexpectedly he was blocked by a limited wall. While the surgery had begun, Sung Tak was confused and didn't know what to do. It turned out that at this time Young Min's body was being taken for a scan, causing his body to exceed the 100 mem limit to the operating room. So Taehyun will be in charge of this surgery and Sung Tak will be the assistant, but he has not yet had Young Min's soul enter his body, so he is very worried. He clumsily dropped the electric electric knife, then accidentally touched his hand to the ground. As a result, he were kicked out and disinfected before being allowed in. When the situation was critical, Young Min quickly went to find Uncle Teth's souls. Here, Uncle Teth in the picture of the cleaning lady agreed to help. She went to the imaging room to take his body away. Thanks to that, Young Min was able to get close to the operating room. On this side, Sung Tak was clumsy and was constantly scolded. Young Min promptly appeared here at the critical moment. Young Min's soul begins to enter Sung Tak's body. Sung Tak immediately changed and performed extremely skillful operations. That made Taehyun start to feel confused. He couldn't even do the basic steps, so Sung Tak asked Taehyun to stay behind so he could do it. If something happens to the patient, Taehyun's professor chair will be blown away. After hearing this, Taehyun was scared, so he gave his seat to Sung Tak. Artificial heart replacement is an extremely difficult and rare technique. Young Min has done it before, so he is very skilled. The dean was extremely surprised. After the surgery, the two young men lay down laughing as if they had won the lottery, but Sejin inside received shocking news from a foreign colleague. The professor read Young Min's test results, which showed that he had no more than a month to live. This makes Sejin extremely sad. That night, Young Min stayed up all night waiting for the baby to wake up. When he saw the baby's eyes open, he was so happy that he cried. This has never happened to an arrogant person like Young Min. At the same time, Young Min wrote a report about the boy's surgery last night, but Sung Tak didn't know Young Min wrote it. When he found out, he quickly ran back to his room to open the computer and delete the report. Unexpectedly, Taehyun had printed it out before. Taehyun discovers that Sung Tak's report is identical to Young Min's previous report. Taehyun began to panic, wondering if Sung Tak was really possessed by Young Min's ghost. On this side, Sung Tak was afraid of being exposed, so he scolded Young Min's soul. While arguing with Young Min's soul, his mother came here. The mother accidentally saw Sung Tak talking alone, looking very scary. Because Young Min had been talking to ghosts since he was a child, his mother thought he was sick. On this side, Sung Tak came to remove the drainage tube for the pediatric patient. Many curious people came to see him because they heard he was very talented. Unexpectedly, the boy opened his eyes and saw Young Min's soul. The boy asked why he got into Sung Tak's body. Young Min panicked and caused the drainage tube to fall out. Everyone was disappointed to see that. On this side, Sejin saw the delivery man in a coma and didn't woke up yet. While checking everything was normal, she was wondering and didn't understand when suddenly the cleaning lady screamed loudly because the trash can lid didn't fit the bin. The cleaning lady had to check to see if there were any dents anywhere. Sejin understood the meaning of that, so removing the bandage on the delivery man's head, and sure enough, she saw blockage there. On this side, Sung Tak knows about Young Min secretly borrowing his body and then performing heart surgery on a singer. Sung Tak knows that if Young Min continues to enter his body, Young Min will not be able to return to body, so he angrily scolded Young Min. At this time, it was time for the singer to have a second heart transplant. Last time Young Min himself performed heart surgery for her because no one else had been able to do this except him. On the day of surgery, Young Min was already blouse, and the female singer was also taken into the anesthesia room. Unexpectedly that day, Sung Tak suddenly disappeared, so the surgery was forced to have Taehyun replace him. Young Min stood next to him, extremely worried, because this was the patient who had his heart valve replaced 10 years ago. This second heart valve replacement is 10,000 times more difficult. Young Min stood next to him extremely worried, and finally, what he was afraid of happened. Taehyun accidentally touched and ruptured the coronary artery. The patient's blood pressure began to drop sharply. Young Min was helpless but couldn't do anything. At this critical moment, Sung Tak appeared, so Young Min's soul entered Sung Tak's body and skillfully corrected Taehyun's mistakes. Thanks to that, the surgery was successful. But after leaving the operating room, Sung Tak asked to end the contract with Young Min. From now on, he will not let Young Min's soul enter his body anymore, because he knows that if Young Min enters soul again, Young Min will really die. Sung Tak's mother was reviewing videos related to her son. She asked the staff to delete them all. Unexpectedly, Director Han copied everything onto a USB and wanted to use it to hijack the inheritance. Today, Sung Tak decided to cancel his contract with Young Min. He doesn't want Young Min to die, but unfortunately the hospital welcomed a patient with a ruptured abdominal aorta. The hospital no longer had a doctor who could perform the surgery, so they were forced to refuse to accept the patient and transfer the patient to another hospital. Suddenly, Sung Tak used his hand to block the hospital bed. This image is identical to Young Min 10 years ago. That day, he himself saved such a patient. At this time, both Young Min and Sung Tak had the same thought, which was to perform surgery to help this patient. As for the consequences, they will calculate later. Because Young Min knows he has to die sooner or later, he wants to use the little time he has left to save people. After they successfully operated on the patient, Sejin announced that the delivery person had also regained consciousness. Young Min hopes he tells the whole truth, both exposing the director's crimes and exonerating Young Min. Unexpectedly, he did not remember the previous previous contract. Young Min was extremely angry. At the same time, Director Han also let someone pay all the hospital bills, as if bribing the delivery person so he wouldn't tell the truth. In vain, they spent so much effort to save him, yet he did just that. While Young Min was angry and wanted to swallow him alive, suddenly Uncle Teth's spirit appeared and told him that anyone who wakes up cannot remember what their soul has ever done. That means that the real delivery man will not remember anything, and now blame him was not meaning. So Sumtak went to remind the delivery man that the day the accident happened, he was hired by Director Han to stab Young Min. After hearing this, the delivery man was extremely scared. That day Sejun's father's soul sat and talked with Young Min's soul. He asked Young Min to help punish his unfilial son. So the next day journalists flocked to interview the son. It turned out that the photo of the father in a coma had been posted online. This method was as successful as expected. People involved in the scandal immediately went to the president's hospital room. Both the hospital director and Taehyun were also present. Sejun called his father's lawyer, who was the keeper of the will, and the lawyer began to announce the president's will. At the same time, a do not resuscitate order was issued, meaning that if his heart stopped beating, the will would be valid. That's why the new son kept him in a coma, because if the president died, he would lose everything. After this scandal, Director Han was heavily criticized by Sungtak's mother. Whether the patient is awake or not, you can't be confused. Seeing that the incident could not be covered up, he had to blame Taehyun. Sejun personally took his father to have his heart and lungs checked, while his soul stayed to play with Uncle Teth's soul. It seems that this will be the last game in the president's life. Sejun checked to see that her father had no signs of life anymore. Both his heart and lungs had stopped working. She cried a lot because she couldn't bear it. Now she had to carry out a do not resuscitate order. Even though didn't want to, Sejun still had to take out the breathing tube to declare his father's death. At that moment, his soul also disappeared. On the day of the funeral, Young Min's soul entered Sumtak's soul again to visit him. Young Min knew he didn't have much longer to live, so he decided to work with Sumtak on all the untreated cases. The hospital board naturally agrees with this. The two of them worked so crazy that they didn't take a break for several days. While Sumtak felt extremely tired, Young Min's soul appeared full of energy. Because Young Min is a soul, he doesn't get tired. However, whenever an emergency patient arrived, the two of them enthusiastically ran quickly to help them. At the same time, Taehyun tried to harm Young Min. He gave the report that Sumtak once wrote to Director Han. Taehyun is certain that this report was written by Young Min. Taehyun confirmed that the director's younger brother was possessed by Young Min's ghost. Director Han didn't believe it at first, but suddenly he heard that his grandfather was coming to the hospital, so he rushed home. Unexpectedly, as soon as he met his grandfather, the grandfather scolded Director Han for letting Sungtak work so hard. Knowing that Professor Young Min is in a coma and lacks a surgeon, why not find a good doctor to replace him? Personnel is also worried that if it can't be done, you should quickly resign. That night, Young Min went to visit Sejun and found her crying. She was miserable because her father had just gone away, so Young Min could not afford to treat her like that. Did he just lie there in a coma, waiting for her to declare her death to him? When Young Min saw her crying, he was also extremely sad. He regretted that he couldn't help her. At this moment, he saw Sumtak coming, so his soul immediately entered Sa and went into the room. Young Min used Sumtak's hand to cover Sejun with a blanket, and he didn't forget to caress her face. In her dream, Sejun was also dreaming of Young Min. She dreamily asked him if he was really there. Sejun suddenly sat up and the two hugged each other. Unexpectedly, thanks to that happy feeling, Young Min's body had brainwaves stimulated. Young Min happily informed Sumtak that he was about to have a chance to wake up. Sumtak hurriedly ran to ask Sejun if Young Min had brainwaves. This makes Sejun suspicious as to why Sumtak knows. Sumtak had to lie and say he dreamed about it. Because of the ability to wake up, Young Min loves life even more. Every day he asks Sumtak to come and remind Sejun to eat. Sumtak's sudden interest in her made Sejun feel confused. She remembered clearly hearing Young Min's singing voice last night, but when she opened her eyes, she saw that it was Sumtak. But when hugged him, she felt like it was really Young Min. Sejun remembered that last night Sumtak stroked her hair. This was really strange. Director Han Sai began to suspect that Sumtak's younger brother was possessed by Young Min's soul. He often secretly watched his younger brother perform surgery and indeed realized that his skillful operation was identical to Young Min's. Moreover, that day, he caught his younger brother carrying Young Min's body away. Apparently, Sumtak was possessed by Young Min's soul. On this side, Sumtak goes to help a female ghost who likes to read books, while her body is still in a coma in her own room. Sumtak checked the medical record and found out that due to lack of sleep, she hit her head on the edge of the table and fell into a coma, but it's unclear what the underlying cause is that keeps her from waking up. So Young Min went directly to ask for her soul. Through that, he knew that when she fell, her nose bled. Sumtak immediately informed this to Sejun. Sejun suddenly realized that it was telangiectasia syndrome and that the fall had caused her a central nervous system infection. Sejin wondered even more why Sumtak knew that mysterious thing. If brain surgery is performed, the patient has a chance to regain consciousness, but the brain surgery procedure is dangerous, so the treating doctor hesitates. Sejin affirmed that this was the only option to help the patient regain consciousness. Her determination convinced the doctor to agree. When the girl's soul heard the news, she was extremely happy, but during the critical moment, the director Han played a trick to expose the story of young Min's soul entering Sumtak's body. He arranged for Sumtak to have surgery on a torn heart valve, then came to observe directly. He let Tae-hyun be his assistant to watch closely to confirm whether Sumtak was really possessed by Professor Young Min or not. Young Min still rotated his wrist before surgery as always. Every operation was extremely skillful, especially the habit of using the left hand to sew. Taehyun admitted that all the operations were done exactly the same, no difference at all. The outside director was also extremely surprised, and just to be sure he called Sejin to create a distraction. Tae-hyun deliberately asked a question that only Young Min knew. Sumtak unconsciously answered, so revealing his identity. When Young Min discovered he had been set up, it was too late. Now they know that Young Min's soul entered Sumtak. Knowing that he could not hide this from director Han, Young Min frankly admitted that Sumtak's body was being controlled by the soul of Professor Young Min. But isn't Young Min his money printing machine? So please obediently wait for Young Min to wake up and don't hurt me, because the secret between director Han and Tycoon's son Young Min knew everything. Director Han was speechless and couldn't say anything. Young Min, in the form of Sumtak, leisurely left. After that conversation, director Han began to be haunted by the existence of ghosts. Even when talking, he didn't dare to speak because he was afraid that Young Min was listening. Young Min also told Sengta that director Han knew everything. Sumta confided that in the past he had an accident that almost killed him, and since then he suddenly had the ability to see ghosts. When he was a child, he was extremely scared and ran away, but then Sumta pretended not to see it, so it was okay. However, when operating on patients, their souls appeared and scared him immensely. That's why Sumta always gives up surgical practice. Therefore, he is always the one who hopes Young Min wakes up as soonest. The two people talking were unfortunately overheard by director Han. Waiting for Sejin to go out of the room while busy on the phone, Han sneaked in and intended to remove Young Min's breathing tube, because if Young Min dies, everything will end. No one will be able to threaten him anymore. But thinking he would lose the money printing machine, he didn't do it anymore. That night, director Han came home and asked Song Ta why he helped the ghost. Song Ta didn't explain much and wanted to cooperate with director Han. If director Han repented, Song Ta would forgive him. Unexpectedly, director Han threatened Song Ta in return. So what if Young Min dies? The next morning, Song Ta quickly ran to the hospital to find Young Min. Luckily, he's okay. Today's the day Sejin had surgery. Sejin is the main doctor performing this surgery. Although this surgery was successful, she still needs treatment for a while longer. When the infections on the brain heal completely, the patient can regain consciousness. Knowing that happiness can help Young Min wake up faster, Sung Ta carefully asked his colleagues to watch over Young Min's body, and he bought Sejin a ticket to see a concert, and at the same time allowed Young Min's soul to enter his body to go see it with Sejin. So that day, Young Min in the form of Sung Ta and Sejin went to see a concert. When the two sat next to each other, Sejin's student memories suddenly appeared. Even though circumstances were poor, they always had each other. Leaving the theater, Sejin curiously asked why Sung Ta chose to be a surgeon. He answered because he once promised a girl to do that, and she worked as a neurologist. This answer was exactly like the promise between her and Young Min the day before. Sejin suddenly froze. She didn't understand why Sung Ta knew that. Since the day Young Min's soul entered Sung Ta's body, his life has encountered many troubles. The pediatric patient they had operated on suddenly had his soul leave his body to find Professor Young Min. The boy's body was unconscious on the floor and was being treated by a female nurse. After Sung Ta ran over, she suddenly asked the ghost of Professor Young Min if he was nearby. The question surprised them greatly. They did not expect that she already knew about the soul possession between Professor Young Min and Sung Ta. Although the nurse did not see the ghost, she spoke confidently. Because she noticed that only Professor Young Min warmed up his hands before surgery, the two of them returned to observe the boy and discovered that he needed another surgery to change the position of the artificial valve. But Sung Ta is an intern, so he doesn't have the authority to preside. He called on other professors to accept this surgery. Unexpectedly, they all refused. Even for other surgeries, they removed Sung Ta's name from the AKIP. These things were all done by director Han. Sung Ta was extremely angry but couldn't do anything. Young Min originally had a charity fund dedicated to helping pay hospital fees for the heart surgeries he was in charge of, and this boy was also on that list. The head of the department said that if the boy was not operated on soon, he would not be able to wake up. He came to ask director Han to operate on the boy, but director Han used private matters to take revenge. All patients in charge of Young Min must suspend medical examination. As for the fund money, it will be transferred directly to the fund that Director Han is in charge of. The head of the department couldn't help but be shocked. How could he trade a patient's life for money like that? At the same time, the boy's soul ran to hug his mother but could not. When he saw his body on the bed, the boy burst into tears, making Song-tak unable to bear it. So, he cooperated with the dean and other professors to create a scene to trick Director Han. Everyone changed their working hours, waiting for the day the boy was to be operated on, but only Song-tak had an empty schedule. Therefore, Song-tak was allowed to enter the operating room as an assistant. Director Han sat outside watching to see if it was young Min or Song-tak. Unexpectedly, during the surgery, Song-tak's hand kept shaking. It seems that the connection between soul and body is unstable, which is extremely dangerous for the surgery. The dean and Director Han outside were also nervous for him. Young Min had to try to remember the promise to help this boy return to see his mother again. But unexpectedly, this phenomenon still happened. It was very difficult to complete the surgery. After the surgery, young Min quickly ran out. He asked Uncle Teth why today when the soul entered Song-tak, he kept having problems, but Uncle Teth didn't understand why. What's even more strange is that Song-tak suddenly remembered the surgery, but before, when young Min's soul entered, he couldn't remember anything. The boy's soul was about to wake up and immediately went to see young Min. The boy asked young Min that he help the boy to wake up, so did young Min wake up with the boy. This statement seemed to crush young Min's heart. He really want to, but he can't. Uncle and nephew hugged each other. Suddenly, the boy's soul disappeared. Young Min rushed to the hospital room and the baby woke up, but now the boy can only see and touch Song-tak, and Song-tak carelessly teased young Min. Young Min left heartbroken. He shouted angrily because he was a vegetable, so no matter what he did, only Song-tak would inherit it. Young Min sadly returned to his room, seeing Sejin falling asleep next to his body, another thing that made him extremely miserable. Young Min burst into tears like a child. Why is everyone so miserable because of him? He scolded his body to wake up, intending to lie there and torment everyone for how long. Outside, Song-tak heard everything. He was also heartbroken for young Min. The next day, Sejin's brother suddenly returned to the hospital. He rushed straight into young Min's hospital room to see Sejin. Young Min's soul standing next to him heard something extremely shocking. It turns out that in the past her brother deliberately forced Sejin to go to America. Otherwise, he would have someone break young Min's arm. That day, he hired a group of thugs to warn young Min. They threatened to make young Min's hand unable to be operated on. Today, he came here to cause trouble again. He wanted to force his sister to sign a paper refusing to inherit the father's property. Young Min helplessly watched Sejin struggle with her evil brother. Luckily, Song-tak ran there in time. Young Min's soul entered Song-tak's body and grabbed Jin-suk's collar. Then he punched this evil brother straight in the face. At this time, the hospital director appeared. They pulled each other back to the room to continue discussing plans to kill people. However, Director Han wanted to withdraw from the plan. He didn't want anything to do with Sejin's brother anymore. Seeing this, Jin-suk immediately threatened to reveal the hospital that killed young Min and his father. After hearing this, Director Han was extremely scared. Uncle Tef found out the reason when young Min's soul entered Song's body have problems. The reason is because young Min's comatose body has gotten better, so his soul occasionally fluctuates to return to his body. Now if they continue to let our souls enter our bodies, the souls of both people will be disturbed. Therefore, young Min was forced to stop merging with Seng-tak. Therefore, the surgeries had to be temporarily postponed. Sung-tak sees that himself as a doctor, but if he can't help patients, then life is meaningless. So he studied like crazy day and night. At this time, Director Han met Taehyun. He said that a patient who had just improved suddenly died overnight. What if he used this method to deal with young Min? At the same time, Sung-tak went to Sejin and confessed everything. The actions that she felt familiar with him were because young Min had entered Sung-tak's body. Young Min noticed and quickly shouted to stop. If he don't stop, young Min will enter Sung-tak's body. Sung-tak had to leave, leaving Sejin in the room extremely confused. Outside, two people argued for a while. When young Min turned around, he saw Sejin lying on the floor. He quickly used Sung-tak's body to carry Sejin to the emergency room. It turns out Sejin was overworked and lacking sleep, so she fainted. At the same time, Taehyun returned to the hospital. According to Director Han's orders, he will assassinate young Min today. Taehyun went to the hospital room to assassinate young Min's body, but Sung-tak had arranged for bodyguards, so he couldn't do anything yet. Young Min's soul entered Sung-tak's body and personally cut the dishes that Sejin liked to eat, then took her shopping for clothes. Sejin once again felt that she was very close to young Min. Emotions were so overwhelming that she couldn't hold back her tears. The next day, Sung-tak went home to help his mother supervise the plumbing workers. He picked up the faucet and accidentally sprayed it everywhere. Sung-tak suddenly understood something and rushed to the hospital. He found out the cause of young Min's deep coma, which was due to the blood flow to young Min's brain being compressed. They immediately took young Min's body for a CT scan. scan. Sure enough, it was discovered that the artery was being compressed. Because she was so happy, Sejin hugged Sung-tak. Youngmin quickly entered his body to enjoy this happy feeling. Sung-tak then opened a faculty meeting to announce this. He confidently explained every detail, making the professors admire him. The head of the department immediately said, so let's schedule the surgery. Sung-tak asked the head of the department to be the main surgeon, and he would assist as an assistant. The two scheduled surgery for Youngmin tomorrow morning, but Youngmin is worried because Uncle Teth has told him not to enter the Seoul anymore, because yesterday when he went shopping with Sejin, his soul was also disturbed. If during brain surgery the connection between the body and flickered again, it is very dangerous. Youngmin decided to teach everything to Sung-tak. At least if something goes wrong he can handle it. On this side, Director Han knows that Sung-tak will be an assistant for this surgery. He suddenly remembered that recently Youngmin had been having trouble while possessing soul, so he immediately hatched an evil plan. At this time a patient had a ruptured aorta, causing blood to flow non-stop, but currently the hospital no longer has any surgeons on duty. Sung-tak couldn't help but accept this surgery. That made Youngmin very upset. I told you being possessed now is very dangerous. If there is a problem during surgery, the patient can lose his life. However, Sung-tak was still very stubborn. He still to proceed with the surgery. Entering the operating room, Sung-tak was confused and didn't know what to do. While the victim's blood pressure continued to drop, Youngmin's soul outside was extremely worried. Sung-tak looked out the window for help. When the machine reported that the patient was about to die, Youngmin took the risk of entering his soul into Sung-tak's body to continue the surgery. The operations are extremely skillful. Thought this patient would be saved, but unexpectedly as the surgery was about to end, Youngmin's soul was pushed out of Sung-tak's body. Sung-tak doesn't know what to do next. Youngmin quickly reached out to re-enter Sung-tak's body, but couldn't anymore. In a critical moment, Uncle Teth ran in and yelled at Sung-tak to continue the surgery, but now it was too late. The patient's heartbeat was no longer there. The patient's soul stood looking at them. Sung-tak was dumbfounded because he had just lost a person's life. He couldn't stand it, so he ran out. The surgery failed, so Director Han called the department head to investigate. However, the head of the department said this was not a medical incident because the patient's aorta had already ruptured before that. Sung-tak wanted to save the patient, so he performed the surgery. Everyone protected Sung-tak, making Director Han mad, but couldn't do anything. After that incident, Sung-tak was so shocked that he cut off contact with everyone. The mother was worried about her son, so she searched everywhere. Director Han saw this and immediately said that it was because she forced him to become a doctor. If you love Sung-tak, let him come home. Then Director Han and two people discussed how to kill Youngmin. He told Taehyun to perform Youngmin's surgery like it was an accident, that is to let Youngmin die before being taken into the operating room. Then Taehyun will not be held responsible. Since Sung-tak is not here, he will let Taehyun take Sung-tak's place. They also prepared wine to drink to celebrate Youngmin's death. Youngmin's soul was nearby and heard everything. The urgent thing now is to find Sung-tak and return. The nurse went to the house and met Sung-tak there. Unexpectedly, he had already prepared his resignation letter and asked her to bring it and submit it for her. But on this side, Youngmin's soul did not give up. He firmly believes that Uncle Teth's ghost is the one who possessed him 12 years ago. He begged Uncle Teth to help him, so Uncle Teth devised a plan to call Sung-tak back. But the mother's side has now agreed to let Sung-tak quit his job. Both mother and daughter plan to travel far away. At this time, Sejin had someone calling, so she had to leave quickly. Unexpectedly, just a short distance away, the nurse called to say that Youngmin was in danger. Sejin returned to find that someone had lowered his bed, causing water to flow back inside, causing pneumonia. A colleague reported this news to Sang-tak, and upon hearing that, he immediately cancelled his return flight. Unexpectedly, when he returned to the hospital, he found out that this was Youngmin's trick to get Sung-tak to return. This makes Sung-tak very angry. Back home, Sung-tak receives a text message that Youngmin's surgery has been postponed indefinitely. Sung-tak suddenly felt very sad. Sung-tak recalls Youngmin being able to save many patients because he entered his body. If they lose a talented person like Youngmin, there will be many patients who cannot be saved. Unexpectedly, the next day, the colleagues told him that Youngmin had to be transferred to the hospital. After hearing this, Sung-tak wanted to rush back to the hospital, but suddenly, next to him, a baby fell to the ground, unconscious. The dean appeared and asked about the illness of the baby from the mother. Suddenly, Uncle Teth's soul entered a person who ran to buy first aid equipment. When he brought it back, Uncle Teth entered his soul to the head of the department to give first aid to the boy. Thanks to a few small tricks, the boy was saved in time. It turns out that Uncle Teth was also a very good doctor. When finished, Sung-tak rushed in to stop Sejin from moving Youngmin away. He promised to fight with Youngmin until everything was over. The next day, Sung-tak brought all his belongings to the hospital to stay. He hired more bodyguards to guard Sung-tak's hospital room in case something bad happened. After that, he followed Youngmin's soul Seoul every day to ask about surgery. He wanted to use his own hands to save patients. The first step is to stitch a simple incision on the head pillow, so Sung-tak practiced day and night. Next is learning to insert a tracheal tube. Looking at Sung-tak's clumsiness, Young-min helplessly said that if he did this, the patient had died already. Sung-tak is so diligent that he spends his entire lunch hour practicing picking up each grain of rice, with the aim of practicing his skillful hands. Gradually practice suturing blood vessels with balloons. At first, Sung-tak was clumsy, making Young-min angry, but with perseverance, he finally succeeded. Sung-tak moves on to practice on the model heart. He stayed up all night so tired that he fell asleep on the table. Unfortunately, the hospital suddenly received many emergency cases due to a series of traffic accidents. Among them was the most serious patient. Sung-tak courageously took this case. Young-min stood next to guide Sung-tak little by little. The trainee practiced with his true strength for the first time. He sewed the patient's wound himself. Everything went smoothly at first, but at this moment someone had a cardiac arrest. The doctors on duty tried very hard but failed. The victim's soul appeared, causing Sung-tak to freeze. The doctors have officially given up. This patient's soul is also about to disappear. However, this time Young-min told Sung-tak to try harder. He jumped onto the table and enthusiastically pressed the victim's chest with all his hope. Sung-tak's face was extremely emotional. He stared at the ghost, determined to save this guy. This surprised everyone around. Very quickly, the victim's soul disappeared. This guy showed signs of life again. Sung-tak breathed a sigh of relief. Sejin stood next to observe everything. She began to have doubts. She remembered that Tae-huin had said that Young-min's soul entered Sung-tak's body. Plus, many times when she's with him, she feels like it's Young-min. Perhaps Young-min's soul entered that guy. Sejin decided to verify this for herself. She immediately went to ask the nurse about the food that Sung-tak didn't like. Then she deliberately invited him out to eat. Unexpectedly, Sung-tak ate very well. This made Sejin firmly believe that the person in front of her was Young-min. She happily said that from now on, she would invite him out to eat every day. Unexpectedly, two people were walking on the street when disaster struck. The older brother, who was always watching the two of them, came to cause trouble because he thought that Sejin was dating Sung-tak. He sent his juniors to secretly attack Young-min that made his soul out of Sung-tak's body. Sejin ran over and saw Sung-tak had fainted. Young-min's soul is weak right next to him because there was his body didn't nearby, so Young-min's soul began to disappear. At this time, Sejin suddenly called Young-min's name. She knew all the secrets between him and Sung-tak. Sejin quickly called the nurse to send an ambulance came here. Uncle Teth came here and saw that Young-min's soul was about to disappear. When in danger, he quickly possessed an employee, then picked up Sung-tak's body and put it down for Young-min's soul to enter. Thanks to that, Young-min's soul was saved. When Young-min got in the car, he realized that Sejin already knew everything. She looked at Sung-tak with happiness. From that day on, Sejin smiled happily every day. As for Young-min, he comes every day to ask Sung-tak to convey his words to Sejin. He even borrowed Sung-tak's body to have lunch with Sejin every day. Sung-tak's lover see that, and extremely jealous, the girl intentionally slapped hard to push Young-min's soul out. The two girls started fighting over Sung-tak's body. Seeing that something was wrong, they started to sit down and discuss. The two will take turns loving Sung-tak. Only on odd days will Young-min borrow Sung-min's body to date Sejin, and each time Sejin borrow a body, it can't be more than 2 hours. Just when everything seemed to be going smoothly, Sejin discovered that Young-min's white blood cell count had increased. After taking his body for testing, Sejin said drug-resistant bacteria were spreading very quickly, making pneumonia more and more serious. There can be no more delay now. Sung-tak immediately held a medical council meeting. This time, the illness was much more complicated than the last time, because in addition to surgery, infection is also involved. Just one mistake and will lose the life. If thoracic surgery is performed, it will be completely resolved, but 99% of the time, it will fail. Even though opening the neck area is safe, he will have to wear a net tube for the rest of his life. Daily activities will be very cumbersome, and the tube can get clogged at any time. Young-min's soul and Sung-tak go out to talk privately. They knew that if they had neck surgery, they could save his lives, but later Young-min also lost the ability to save people. So Sung-tak decided that even if he searches the earth, he must find the best doctor to help Young-min have thoracic surgery. He called all the best professors, but because Young-min is a famous doctor, no one dares to treatment for him. If anything goes wrong, they will have a reputation for life. Because there was no doctor to help him perform the surgery, so Young-min asked Sung-tak to see Tae-hyun. Even though he knew that Tae-hyun had wanted to kill him several times, Young-min took the risk and asked Tae-hyun to join the surgery team. Dr. An also recognized that the person in front of him was Young-min's soul entering. Tae-hyun immediately went to see Director Han to ask him to operate on Young-min. Taking that opportunity, he will assassinate Young-min as promised. Director Han happily agreed to this, and Young-min's surgery was immediately performed. The head of the department and the best doctor doctors are all here watching. Even Director Han came to watch. Taehyun was in charge of the surgery. He nodded at Director Han. Then Sung-tak also entered the room as an assistant. The two nodded, signaling the surgery to begin. But suddenly Sung-tak and Taehyun switched places, surprising everyone outside. Young-min's soul entered Sung-tak's body. As always, he rotated his wrist before surgery, and at the same time Young-min announced to change the content of the surgery. That is to change from neck surgery as originally to thoracic surgery. It turned out that Taehyun had gone to Young-min's office before. Taehyun sat crying because he regretted the bad things he did. That's why Young-min trusted him. They acted together to trick Director Han into agreeing them to perform surgery on Young-min. At the same time, the most difficult surgery in the history of medicine took place. Young-min's soul performed surgery on himself. However, everything did not go smoothly because of the incident where Young-min's soul entered Sung-tak. His hands and feet trembled, causing blood to splatter. People outside were also extremely worried. Sung-tak must be very brave to fight back. Each surgical cut is precise and rhythmic, thus promptly correcting errors. Even though his body was becoming more and more dizzy, Young-min still tried to complete the surgery until the important part had just been sewn. Suddenly, Young-min's soul was extracted from Sung-tak's body. Young-min is now too weak to enter his soul into Sung-tak's body anymore. Taehyun was supposed to do the rest, but unexpectedly, Young-min directly asked Sung-tak to do it. He wants to use his own body to help Sung-tak overcome his fear, but this is Young-min's body, so the pressure is heavy on Sung-tak's shoulders. Young-min next to him constantly encouraged Sung-tak to calm down and guided him in everything. Sung-tak carefully did everything quite well, causing Young-min's soul to gradually fade away. After completing the surgical wound, Young-min's soul returned to his body. The doctor announced that all indicators are stable. All the doctors were happy, but only Director Han was sad. After the surgery, the head of the department told Taehyun that Young-min had recommended him many times to the position of professor, but Director Han did not approve because he discriminated against him for going to a school with no reputation. Director Han scolded Taehyun for not killing Young-min. Taehyun said he wanted to atone for his mistakes and he never wanted to live that evil again. That night, Sung-tak was looking at his phone and discovered a video. At that time, Young-min's soul entered his body and recorded it. Young-min is afraid that when he wakes up, he will forget all the beautiful memories of when he was a soul, especially the fact that he once borrowed Sung-tak's body. The video recounts everything in detail when Young-min was the soul in 3 months. At the same time, Young-min also woke up. Sung-tak quickly ran over to show his joy. As expected, Young-min doesn't remember anything. Sung-tak was mercilessly chased away. Sejin brought flowers to give, but Young-min forgot that he and Sejin had made up. He cruelly chased Sejin away because she abandoned him in the past. Sejin heard that and felt sad. She walked away with much sadness. Even when Sung-tak came to help change the bandage, Young-min refused because in the past the two of them hated each other. A moment later, Director Han came to inquire. Seeing that Young-min had forgotten everything, he was extremely happy. Suddenly, Young-min said that he was so happy. Why didn't he bring out the bottle of wine from the previous day to drink to celebrate? Young-min recounted all Director Han crimes. It turns out Young-min didn't forget anything. Hearing that, Director Han was extremely worried and scared. While thinking about how to assassinate Young-min, the police suddenly called to ask Director Han to assist in the investigation. It turned out that Taehyun had surrendered and provided all evidence that Director Han and Jin-suk harmed the patient. Taehyun has completed his atonement, so he is very at peace. Sejin's brother was also arrested for his crimes. The next day, Young-min was able to walk with the tubes. Never before have he seen such beautiful sunlight. While being romantic, Sung-tak came to cause trouble, so the two of them argued again. Sejin inherited all of her father's assets. She donated everything to charity and moved into Young-min's house. The two of them hugged each other very happily. The next day, Young-min immediately went to work. He always tried to cure the most difficult cases, and accompanying him is Sung-tak. Because everyone's health is precious, so don't wait until you lose it to appreciate it. The movie ends here. If you find it interesting, please subscribe to my support channel. Goodbye and see you again.